in a luxurious neighborhood was where the wealthy played pretend lives behind their high gates and polished cars. Charles and Matilda Ezzy's house stood proudly among them, a sprawling duplex with marble floors and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. From the outside, their life seemed perfect. But behind the heavy front door was a marriage held together by duty, not love. Matilda had married Charles 10 years ago. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was practicality. Her parents, who were struggling traders, had been thrilled when Charles, the ambitious son of a wealthy chief, chose their daughter. They saw it as her ticket out of poverty. And for a while, it seemed they were right. Charles showered her with gifts and promises, but as time passed, those promises grew cold. Matilda had given him 2 beautiful children, Jennifer, their clever 12-year-old who loved to read novels, and Kingsley, a mischievous 9-year-old with a knack for fixing broken toys. Her life revolved around them. She poured her energy into raising them while Charles focused on expanding his business empire. At first, she told herself that his long absences were a sign of his hard work. But as the years dragged on, she began to see the truth. Charles wasn't just busy, he was indifferent. He didn't ask how her day went or notice the exhaustion in her eyes after hours of managing the household. Still, Matilda stayed. She had seen her parents' struggles to provide for their children, and she was determined to give her kids a better life. She endured the loneliness, the late nights, and even the whispered gossip among their neighbors about Charles's wandering eye. Then came Mary, the housekeeper. She was a quiet woman in her late 20s, with big brown eyes and a timid smile. She had been recommended by a family friend after their previous help left unexpectedly. Mary was efficient and hardworking, never complaining about the long hours or the demanding nature of the household. Matilda had thought she was lucky to find someone so reliable. But luck, as Matilda would soon learn, could be deceptive. It happened one humid evening. The generator was humming in the background, fighting against the constant power outages, and the children were already asleep. Matilda had just finished her nightly routine, checking on Jennifer and Kingsley, locking the doors and setting out plans for the next day, when she heard voices coming from the kitchen. At first, she thought it was Mary and the gateman chatting, but as she approached, she realized it was Charles. His voice was sharp, cutting through the otherwise still night. "You promised you'd be careful," he hissed. "I didn't plan this." Mary's voice cracked with emotion. "You think I wanted this to happen?" Matilda's heart stopped. She pressed herself against the wall, listening as her husband and housekeeper argued about something she couldn't yet piece together. "And now what? You think I'll just accept this? I have a family to protect," Charles barked. "I didn't ask for anything," Mary sobbed. "I don't want to ruin your life, but this baby is innocent." The word baby echoed in Matilda's mind, shattering her world into 1,000 pieces. She felt the air leave her lungs, her legs weakening beneath her. When the voices died down, she stumbled back to her bedroom, her mind spinning. Her husband had fathered a child with their housekeeper. The betrayal felt like a knife to her chest, sharp and cruel. That night, Matilda didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a chaotic mess of anger, sadness, and fear. But by dawn, one thought stood clear. She needed to protect her children. If Charles had been reckless enough to jeopardize their family, she would make sure he wouldn't take everything from her children. Matilda didn't confront Charles immediately. She knew him too well. He was proud, quick to anger, and dismissive of her concerns. A heated argument would only give him the upper hand. Instead, she decided to play the long game. The next morning, she reached out to her childhood friend, Rosalind. They met at a quiet cafe, far from prying eyes. Rosalind, a lawyer and Matilda's confidant since their boarding school days, listened patiently as Matilda poured out her pain. "Rose, he has a child with Mary," Matilda whispered, her voice trembling. Rosalind's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "I heard them. They were arguing about it last night," Matilda replied, wiping away a tear. Rosalind leaned forward, her tone firm. "Matilda, you can't let him ruin your life. You've sacrificed too much for this marriage, but you need to be smart about this. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment." They spent hours discussing strategies. Rosalind suggested transferring the family assets into Matilda's name, using Charles's trust in her to their advantage. It was a risky move, but Matilda knew it was necessary. Back at home, Matilda began her act. She pretended everything was normal, even as her heart ached every time she saw Charles or Mary. She smiled, cooked his favorite meals, and listened to his complaints about work. When the time was right, she brought up the idea. "Charles, I've been reading about some new tax laws," she said one evening as they sat in the living room. "It might be a good idea to transfer some of our assets into my name. It could save us a lot of money." Charles barely looked up from his phone. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Rosalind mentioned it the other day. It's what a lot of families are doing to avoid unnecessary tax penalties." Charles nodded, distracted. "Fine. Just handle it. I don't have time for this." Matilda hid her relief. Step one of her plan was complete. In the weeks that followed, she worked tirelessly to secure the transfers. Rosalind helped her draft the necessary documents, ensuring everything was airtight. Charles signed the papers without a second glance, trusting Matilda's intentions. Meanwhile, Matilda kept a close eye on Mary. She noticed the small changes: a loose button on her blouse, her tired eyes, and the way she avoided Matilda's gaze. It was clear that Mary was struggling, but Matilda refused to let sympathy weaken her resolve. By the time the transfers were complete, Matilda was ready for the next phase of her plan, exposing Charles for the man he truly was. It was a Saturday evening when Matilda made her move. The Ez family often hosted small gatherings, a tradition Charles loved because it allowed him to flaunt his wealth and success. Their friends and associates admired Charles, seeing him as a man of integrity and charm. Matilda, however, had long known the cracks beneath the surface. She had carefully planned every detail of this evening. The children were spending the weekend with her sister in Abuja, safely away from the storm that was about to break. The living room gleamed from Mary's diligent cleaning, and the caterers had laid out trays of peppered chicken, jollof rice, and fried plantains. The house buzzed with chatter and laughter as guests arrived in their finest agbadas and sequined dresses. Matilda moved through the crowd, her calm demeanor hiding the storm brewing within her. She greeted everyone with warm smiles, exchanging pleasantries and compliments. Charles, ever the host, was in his element, joking with his friends and ensuring everyone had a drink in hand. Halfway through the evening, when the guests were relaxed and the room was alive with laughter, Matilda tapped her glass with a spoon, signaling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's always a pleasure to have friends and family in our home." The room quieted as everyone turned to face her. Charles stood beside her, his arm draped loosely around her waist, completely unaware of what was coming. "Tonight," Matilda continued, "I want to share something personal, something that has deeply affected our family." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "I recently discovered that my husband has been having an affair." Gasps filled the room. Charles was shocked, his smile fading as he turned to stare at her. "And not just an affair," Matilda said, her voice growing firmer. "He has fathered a child with our housekeeper, Mary." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the women whispered among themselves. Mary, who had been serving drinks, stood rooted to the spot, her tray trembling in her hands. Charles recovered quickly, his voice sharp and defensive. "Matilda, what nonsense is this? Are you trying to embarrass me in front of our guests?" Matilda met his glare with unwavering determination. "The truth deserves to be heard, Charles. These people see only the man you pretend to be. But I know the real you, the man who has betrayed his wife and family." Her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Charles's reputation, the very thing he had worked so hard to build, was crumbling before his eyes. The days following the party were a whirlwind of chaos. Charles moved into his brother's home in Victoria Island, avoiding Matilda and the fallout of her revelation. Gossip spread like wildfire through their social circle. The once admired Charles' ease was now the subject of ridicule and judgment. Matilda, meanwhile, began the process of filing for divorce. She consulted Rosalind, who guided her through the legalities. "We have everything we need to make this swift and decisive," Rosalind assured her. "With the assets now in your name, you hold the upper hand." Charles tried to fight back. He hired expensive lawyers and attempted to paint Matilda as vindictive and unstable. But the evidence was against him. Rosalind had ensured that every document was in order, leaving Charles with little room to maneuver. The divorce proceedings were grueling. Matilda sat through hours of questioning, reliving the pain of Charles's betrayal. But she refused to back down. Her focus remained on her children. When the final ruling came, it was clear. Matilda retained full custody of Jennifer and Kingsley, as well as the family home and all financial assets. Charles was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the bitter taste of defeat. For the first time in years, Matilda felt a sense of liberation. She had fought for her children's future and won. The house felt different without Charles. It was quieter, but more peaceful. Matilda had replaced the heavy tension with a sense of calm. She redecorated the living room, swapping out the ornate furniture Charles loved for simpler, more practical pieces. It was a small change, but it symbolized a fresh start. Jennifer and Kingsley adapted quickly. Without their father's constant criticism, they flourished. Matilda felt a deep pride watching her children thrive. She also threw herself into work, launching a pastry business with Rosalind's help. Baking had always been her passion, and now she had the chance to turn it into something more. The business grew quickly, gaining a reputation for delicious pastries and excellent service. Mary, however, did not stay. Shortly after the party, she packed her bags and left without saying goodbye. Matilda felt no hatred toward her. The young woman had made her choices, but Matilda's focus remained on her own family. Through it all, Matilda found strength she didn't know she had. She discovered that she was more than Charles's wife or Jennifer and Kingsley's mother. She was a woman capable of rebuilding her life on her own terms. Matilda's journey taught her, and those around her, a valuable lesson. No one's worth should be tied to someone else's actions. She had endured betrayal and heartbreak, but refused to let them define her. Instead, she chose resilience. Her story became a source of inspiration for others in her community. Matilda's message was simple. Life might break you, but it's up to you to piece yourself back together. And so, Matilda lived not as a victim of her circumstances, but as a victor over them. She walked with her head held high, her heart full of hope, and her children by her side, proof that even in the face of betrayal, life could be rebuilt. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this one. Goodbye.